Now moving forward this morning, we have our first keynote address. Is from an individual whose full bio is in your program on page 4. I just want to highlight a couple of those thoughts. Our keynote speaker is Jock. He's an international trade advisor with Beacon Economics, and he's widely regarded as one of California's foremost authorities on world trade, global economic trends, and internationalization of the global and state economy. He's a former consultant to the California Commission for Economic Development and the California State World Trade Commission, and he's currently International Trade Advisor for Beacon. A principal emphasis of his research and consulting work involved the logistics of foreign trade and, more specifically, the condition of California's international trade infrastructure. And Jock came down to us from Sacramento today. He took the train, he got off here at Jack London Square, so a warm welcome. Let's give a warm welcome to Jock.
Thank you, Jim, and thank you to the Big Plan Coalition for inviting me here. As with the previous speakers, I'm excited to be here. I'm also nervous to be here. I thought I've got about 300 people looking at me.
A little louder.
Is this any better? Welcome back, Jim. Thank you. Thank you to the Big Planning Coalition for inviting me down here today. I hope so. My expertise is in transportation, logistics, not electronics. Bear with me for a minute. We can sort this out. As I was saying, like the previous speakers, I'm excited to be here, joined with this conference today. I'm also nervous because you're all looking at me expecting to be entertained. Some of you are peering around various pillars and posts, reminding me of Fenway Park. I've been there. I've watched games looking around posts, so I understand your predicament. I'm also a little bit trepidatious in meeting with any group in the Bay Area having to do with maritime trade. And it goes back to an episode of the earlier part of my career when, back in the early 1980s, I was a consultant to the California Commission for Economic Development, which was then chaired by the Lieutenant Governor, who was Leo McCarthy at the time. Now, many of you knew Leo. He was a long-time political figure in San Francisco, county supervisor, later member of the State Assembly, ultimately Speaker of the State Assembly, and then Lieutenant Governor for 2 terms. I was working for him in the early part of the 80s when there was a number of reports appearing in the Chronicle and the Examiner, the Tribune, about strife on the docks. There was unsettled conditions. The labor unions were upset, that the port management were troubled by what was going on. And it just seemed like it was going to threaten the entire economic fabric of the Bay. So Leo called me and he said, well, I feel like I should deal with this. And I said, what do you have in mind? He said, well, I want you to convene a conference meeting of all of the affected interests, the steamship lines, the IOW, the terminal operators, tugboat people, everybody you can imagine that has some stake in this, and bring them together in one room, and I'll meet with them. And I said, well, sure, but what do you intend to do? He said, well, he went on about talking about harmony in reports, and I thought, Leo, you were a long time in San Francisco, and I'm just sort of fresh from Maine, so I'll defer to you on understanding the politics at the San Francisco Bay, but it really seems to me that this is a pretty daunting challenge. Do you want to warm up with something easier, like trying to broker a peace accord in Northern Ireland, or invite the Israelis and the Arabs over for tea to chat about some settlement there? Do you really want to go into this room and meet with these people who are viciously opposed to each other? And he persisted, so we wound up having a session in the old World Trade Club in the ferry building. Days when the Embarcadero freeway loomed over the ferry building. It was a dark and foreboding structure, and so we turned up there one rainy afternoon. and walk into this room, and it's full of the various representatives of the maritime industry of the Bay. What was it like? Well, older members of the audience might remember a television series from the 1980s called Hill Street Blues, in which Captain Furillo would occasionally feel compelled to organize a summit of the, well, let's not call them gangs, but sort of more disgruntled elements of the local community, who would all come together, and they're all very colorful figures, but they're bitterly opposed to each other, and inevitably these meetings that Furillo convenes descend into chaos, and when it's left to Sergeant Esterhazy to restore order to it. That was pretty much what it was like going to this meeting. As we sat down, the CHB plainclothes officer, who was Leo's driver, but also his bodyguard, whispered in my ears, "Do you think we should have had a metal detector here?" So, from that background, here I am, once again, talking about maritime issues for a group of San Francisco Bay Area people. Now, I've come here to heuristicate. Sorry, Norman, don't worry, it's not what you think it is. It sounds like what baseball players do with their chewing tobacco, but really, those of you who, like me, were obliged to study Latin for 4 years by the Jesuits, who are classical scholars, will remember that heuristication is the ancient art of divining the future by examining the entrails of sacrificial animals. Pliny the Elder said that there were pundits or soothsayers in Naples who foretold the demise of Pompeii by examining the birds that they're eating at lunch. Or perhaps the fact that their feathers were charred for having just flown over Vesuvius was a giveaway. In any case, it was a practice that persisted for many years and has been discouraged of late, largely because of the intervention of PETA. It seems to have survived only among those presidential election pundits who routinely try to figure out where things are going in the presidential contest. But we economists are now obliged to use the tools of economics in order to try to foretell the future. And we do so in a number of different ways. And one of the things we do quite consciously is we try to tart up the forecast by throwing in a lot of opaque terminology, references to the models we use, linear regressions, algorithms. I'm prompted to ask how many of you still wake up in the middle of the night with cold sweats thinking about algebra or calculus classes in high school or college. But it's almost a way of deterring people from looking under the hood into the forecast and seeing what's really there. We use a lot of sophisticated tools. They usually are explained in Appendix X, which nobody ever reads. The language here defies the laws of grammar. But in any case, ultimately, to be honest, it comes down to a series of judgment calls. And we use our best judgment to decide when we're building a model, what factors, what variables to take into consideration, which factors to build into the model, and perhaps more importantly, how much weight to give each of those factors that we build in. And one of the things we do in transportation forecasting is to put a great deal of emphasis on gross domestic product. Some on population growth, but a heavy emphasis on gross domestic product has been a key variable trying to understand how much and how fast the demand for goods will rise, and therefore what we can expect in terms of the volume of goods that are being transported through the transportation systems, whether they be domestic or international. Oftentimes we're right. We do a good job. But sometimes we don't get it right. And sometimes we get it horribly wrong, embarrassingly wrong. Gee, Mr. O'Connell, do you have an example of a forecast that went horribly, embarrassingly wrong? And importantly, one that you weren't involved in producing? Well, I happen to have one. And it involves this region of the state. In 2000, the Metropolitan Transportation Commission issued an air cargo forecast for the three major airports in the Bay Area. At the time, San Francisco, Oakland, and San Jose were handling about 1.9 million tons of cargo a year. That was the amount of cargo they handled in the year 2000. The forecast held that because air cargo had been a fast-growing element of the state's commerce over the previous decade, that in all likelihood that trend would continue. This is sort of a default supposition that when you're making a forecast, you assume pretty much that the future is going to look a lot like what just happened, unless you've got some compelling reason to think otherwise. And in 2000, the people who were doing the forecast for the Metropolitan Transportation Commission felt, oh, there's no compelling reason to think that the past will be replicated as we move ahead the next 10 or 20 years. So the forecast held that by the year 2020, air cargo at the three principal airports in the Bay Area would be 5.5 million tons. How are they doing? Well, we're a little more than halfway to that benchmark horizon level. Last year, in 2011, the three major airports in the Bay Area handled 1.1 million tons of cargo. So they've got a lot of picking up to do if they can reach that 5.5 million ton target. The forecast was horribly wrong, and it sort of went abruptly wrong. And it just wasn't 2000, it just wasn't 9/11 that did this. There's a number of other factors, but I don't want to get into the reasons why, particularly the reasons why that forecast fell apart very quickly. But I want to offer as a cautionary tale for a couple of reasons. One is that the results of that, the findings of that forecast survived even after it became quite apparent to everybody who bothered to look at the numbers that it was wrong. And it's part of what's become a cut and paste mentality. That you assume that, well, we're going to update last year's report, and nothing really major seems to have happened since last year. We're too lazy to go look at the new numbers, so let's just cut out the segment of last year's report and plug it into this year's report. Well, that might work for one year or the next, but when you start doing that over time, you wind up getting reports being published by various organizations that say, as you do in the case of air cargo in the Bay Area, as far advanced as the year 2007, 2008, you still get reports by eminent groups within the Bay Area saying air cargo is the fastest growing element of the Bay Area's international trade or trade in general. Perfectly untrue, but something to watch out for as you move ahead. It's important to go back periodically and reach out the numbers. The other reason to offer this as a caution is just pure prudence. The forecasts were based on the best available information, and were really a consensus of what the FAA, the International Air Traffic Administration, Boeing, Airbus were all saying. This was not a wild forecast. It was based upon the best available information, and it went abruptly and embarrassingly wrong. So as you go ahead and you try to figure out where things are happening with the expectations of volumes that are moving through airports and seaports in the Bay Area, you've got to be less than stridently confident in what you're doing. And that's something we constantly try to remind ourselves. We don't have the luxury that the Federal Reserve Bank or the International Monetary Fund, the World Bank have periodically adjusting their economic forecasts. The Fed just announced yesterday a new adjustment. They do that quarterly. The IMF, World Bank, all periodically adjust their forecasts. They can get away with that. Unfortunately, we can't, because most of our clients happen to be people who run airports and seaports and major transportation facilities where long-term planning is absolutely essential. And where a lot of money is spent on making sure that they've got the right equipment, the right resources, that their channels are sufficiently deep to accommodate what is likely to happen in the future. OOCL just signed a 40-year lease for a terminal at the Port of Long Beach. 40 years. You almost have to say, what were they thinking? Turn the clock back 40 years, 1972. How different is today's world from 1972? It's astonishing to really think what kinds of changes we've seen now. Nobody had computer. There was no personal computer. There was no internet. We were barely in the containerization age. All of these things have transformed. Whereas people in 1972, much of it could not imagine where we are today. So, for these reasons, it's important to realize that when you're making forecasts, that really beyond the first few years, the clients pretty much don't know. We really can't tell them that. Frequently, we provide them with charts, which I'm avoiding doing today, that show a steady progression of growth out over whatever the planning horizon is. Making it appear that this growth would be like 3% annual average growth rate each successive year going up. It's a straight linear progression out to the end of the planning horizon. 2 or 3 years ago, I was involved with a forecast, and we decided, well, just for heuristic purposes, just to remind people that everything is smooth, let's build in periodic recessions. Let's show a graph that instead of showing a straight line going up, that has jags. We average a recession in the post-war period every 7.5 years. So why not show that recession and then starting out again like that? And we showed that to the client, and they're really upset. Why? Why are you doing this? We're doing it to remind you of the real world, that there's a degree of uncertainty here, that every so often the bottom's going to fall out, and you'll just have to get up and recover and move on. Now, having said that, let me turn to talking about the future of the Bay, particularly with respect to international trade. You can measure things in a number of ways. Typically, as economists and anyone in government tends to look at a number of metrics. The supervisor was talking about jobs. Omar was talking about volumes, TEUs. Often we talk about dollars. Now, when you're measuring international trade through the Bay Area's various gateways, the big player in terms of export trade, measured in dollar value, sits across the Bay at San Francisco International. Last year, they did about $28.6 billion in exports, as opposed to just $18 billion in exports that went out through the Port of Oakland. In many respects, what travels through San Francisco International is a better reflection of the Bay Area's unique economy. This is, without a doubt, a high-tech economy. And understandably, the kinds of goods that are flown out of San Francisco International reflect that. They're industrial equipment, they're electronic equipment, they're biomedical types of things. The stuff that goes out of the Port of Oakland is a different kettle of fish altogether. There's no question the Port of Oakland does the heavy lifting for international trade. There's no question that the Port of Oakland generates a phenomenal number of jobs. And many of those jobs, as noted, are very high-paying jobs. They're the core of the middle class, and they're the kinds of jobs that we want to encourage. The challenge for the Port of Oakland, it seems to me, lies in trying to grow its export market by better promoting itself nationally. It has two advantages going for it. One is that it's the last port of call frequently on most of the lines that are transiting the Pacific. So it's an ideal jumping off point for exports, particularly exports of perishable items or higher value items that need to get to market quickly. You can't really tolerate a 3 or 4 week ocean voyage. The other advantage it has is that it's sitting across the ocean from the fastest growing economy in the world, and one that is increasingly featuring a rapidly growing middle and upper middle class consumer market. As the Chinese move ahead and start rebalancing their economy further toward one that's based not on exports and not on capital investment, but more on domestic consumption, particularly consumer spending, that translates into a greater demand for imported goods by the Chinese. And a lot of those goods are going to come from the United States. And the Port of Oakland is ideally situated to serve that trade. So there's a bright future there if the Port of Oakland can successfully continue to aggressively market itself to shippers throughout the United States, or it as the place to send your goods when they're going to the Far East and end up specifically to China. So I think I'm pretty much running out of time. I know that there's some desire to have questions from the audience. So.
Does anybody have a card filled out for a question, and we'll collect them up here right now?
If not, I'll be happy to ask myself a question about the card.
Real look.
Thank you. Panama Canal. Everybody says it's going to have a huge impact on the West Coast when it opens up. What do you see happening to the ports of call in California when the Panama Canal opens up?
Excellent question. Let me begin by saying that earlier this year I saw a video that was produced by a group in Southern California that featured a number of political figures and important dignitaries, all of whom were caught full frame saying, beat the canal, beat the canal. And well, that's because figures like the former Governor Ray Davis working up all of the enthusiasm that possible to beat the canal. The culmination of this ad, this commercial, was Willie Brown looking into the camera and with all the sincerity he could possibly say, it's about time that people came first and politics came second. Willie? No, this ad was I think a bit hysterical. It was obviously targeted more at the Southern California ports than the Port of Oakland, but the fact that Willie was involved in this suggested that there was some concern manifested here as well. The opening of new sets of docks at the locks of the Panama Canal will no doubt result in more traffic going from the Far East directly to the ports in the Gulf and the coast. That's to be expected in many respects, because if you look at American demographics, you'll find that in the last few decades there's been a progression movement of both population and industry in the states of the former Confederacy. Heavy manufacturers left the upper Midwest and moved to the Southeast. Population growth has been extensive. It's a huge market for anyone selling goods in the United States. So it's only natural that shippers would seek to move goods into the ports adjacent to serving that region of the Gulf, some of the Atlantic coast. So we're going to see more traffic heading through the Panama Canal. Does this necessarily translate into loss of market share? Yes. Does it translate into loss of cargoes or diminishing volume of cargoes? Not necessarily. And this is a growing pie. And as long as we can maintain the infrastructures on the West Coast, particularly the Port of Oakland in this case, to continue to be able to serve large container vessels, to serve them efficiently in conjunction with ground transportation, with BNSF, UP, with trucking lines, if those logistical barriers can be resolved, can move more cargo more efficiently and in a more environmentally benign manner, then we can continue to see increases in the volume of containers moving port. That's the challenge that we face. It's a challenge that we've always faced. But Panama is going to have an impact, not as dramatic as some would say. Allegations that as much as 25% of cargoes might be diverted from the San Pedro Bay ports as a result of the open ports are way exaggerated. And even so, what happens down there has less of an impact on here. Oakland primarily has always been an export. It's the last call, port call. And so it should continue to benefit from resurgent markets in the Far East. So, you worry about Panama, you worry about Prince Rupert, but fundamentally you have to address those challenges that you can address. And those have to do with making sure the ports properly dredged, that the infrastructure is there to move increasing numbers of containers efficiently, economically, and environmentally benign manner. And that's always been a challenge.
I don't see any cards. We're actually right on time. So if everybody, please thank Jock for coming down from Sacramento and providing the